Yo, greetings ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the next part of the Crash Bandicoot series retrospective. I know you all have been waiting quite a while for this one, so let's jump right into it. Crash Twinsanity, when all was said and done, was released to mixed reviews, as you might imagine. Though I'm not one for actually giving much credence to so-called professional game reviews, especially when some at the time noted how Twinsanity was an improvement over the quote-unquote claustrophobic level design of previous games, which is just simply a wildly terrible take. But overall, the general takes were the game was charming in many areas, but ultimately very flawed. However, what about those sales numbers? After all, Crash Throughout the Cortex sold like crazy, so what about this game? Well, sadly, it did not fare very well. Crash Twinsanity had very low sale numbers compared to the other Crash games. As an example, according to VG charts, Crash Throughout the Cortex sold around 5.42 million copies on the PS2 alone, in addition to another 0.59 on GameCube and 1.23 on Xbox, making for a rough estimate of about 7.27 million copies sold worldwide. Compare this to the original Crash trilogy, the first having sold around 6.82 million, Crash 2 having around 4.8 million, and Crash Warped having around 5.7 million. All these being quite great numbers. And what's more is clearly the multi-platform release of Crash Throughout the Cortex positively affected its overall sale numbers, with it being many people's first Crash game period. But that's just the series in general, with even spin-offs like Crash Team Racing having sold 4.79 million, Crash Bash 3.39 million, both clearly doing quite well. And of note on the multi-platform releases, PlayStation clearly being the best-selling console for Crash-related content, with the PS2 always having the best sales of these multi-platform releases, like that of Crash Nitro Kart for example, selling 1.95 million on PS2, 0.31 on Xbox, 0.46 on GBA, and 0.26 on GameCube, pulling up to around 2.98 million overall from this game, with the PS2 release clearly having the most prominent sales numbers. Now, I spent all this time showcasing these numbers to you so I can better contextualize the sales numbers of Crash Twinsanity. Remember, every Crash game up until this point on the PlayStation console has sold at least 1.95 million copies. Rounding that up, that's at least 2 million copies at worst, and near 7 million at best, with most falling somewhere in the middle. So bearing that in mind, what were the sales number of Crash Twinsanity on PS2? Oh no. Only 0.64 million. Not even 1 million copies sold. What about on the Xbox release? 0.15. Together, both making for sales of 0.79 copies sold, not even managing to reach 1 million copies. That is, at this point in time, absolutely terrible for this franchise, especially with this being the next mainline entry in the series, the one that was heavily advertised, the one that despite its many flaws was supposed to be the bold new direction for the franchise. Now, do sales numbers equal a good or bad game? No, of course not. But I tell you what they do equal: stability for a franchise. because even if this game was super well received and was considered a masterpiece, if it sold like absolute shit, then, well, that means from the perspective of the publishers and the people funding these games, it was a bad game. From the perspective of finances, it's objectively a bad game compared to the rest of the series. So, what exactly happened here? Was Crash Twinsanity just so broken and such a mess that no one wanted to play it? Well, no, not at all. I actually think this problem with sales numbers isn't really the fault of the developers or the game itself, so much as it was a shift that had happened in the gaming scene at this particular point in time. Consider what games were coming out in the general gaming scene when Crash Twinsanity came out on the year of 2004. Crash Twinsanity released on September 28th, 2004. What else was coming out around that same time? Oh, I don't know. How about Ratchet & Clank 3, Up Your Arsenal, Sly 2, Band of Thieves, and Jak 3, all three of these being landmark titles in the genre of 3D platformers, and all of which had more mature stories, deeper gameplay, and were already all established series at this point, and all of them being prominent mascots of sort for the PlayStation 2, and of which all the previous entries had sold extremely well in, and had been critically acclaimed, and were all releasing in the same time window as Crash Twinsanity. Crash was no longer the sole mascot of PlayStation anymore, and hell, at this point, I'd say more people associated Ratchet & Clank with PlayStation now during this time, or maybe Jak and Daxter. But see, that's not all. It's not just that there were all these amazing landmark 3D platformer series coming to their end of a trilogy or the next ambitious sequel, all these things that got people excited. That wasn't all that was releasing around that exact same time window as Crash Twinsanity. How about Star Wars Battlefront? How about Tony Hawk's Underground 2? How about Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater? Fable? Grand Theft Auto San Andreas? Oh, and this little known game that you might have heard of called Halo 2. Now, you might be wondering, okay, yeah, but none of those games were 3D platformers. But that's just it. Look at how packed this season is with options. Big, giant, legendary games that will go on to be loved and talked about just as much to this very day. And many of the people who grew up on Crash were trying out these newer, more mature games at that. But even if they weren't, you were literally flooded with options. Hell, there was also a new Spyro game releasing during this period as well. This was during the era where there was something new to be excited about constantly. Hell, I remember as a kid during this time that I was never without option for a new game to get whenever I got the opportunity to get a new game at GameStop. It was a matter of picking which one do I want to prioritize this time. And while Crash was still worth being excited about, he had clearly been pushed aside. After all, Crash Wrath of Cortex, while still selling amazing, was also the worst outing for the series yet. Now I can understand many seeing these much better designed games at the time and sort of forgetting about Crash Bandicoot entirely. Hell, look back at the reviews at the time. While all these games were getting singing reviews from all sorts of places, Crash Twinsanity, unfairly or not, was being compared to the original trilogy, with most articles opening on, does it make the franchise fun again? Does it recapture the magic of the OG trilogy? Why bother with what ifs whenever you have surefire hits all around the same time? And while hindsight is 2020, ultimately this was the objective result all the same. People were not interested in Crash anymore. And while the Wrath of Cortex might have had something to do with that, and all of the heavy hitters might have ultimately contributed to this as well, the result was still that Crash as a franchise, for the first time ever, was not looking so hot. What's more is things were not faring too well in the GBA either, with both Crash Huge Adventure and Crash 2 Entranced both selling just over 1 million units, the first one almost coming close to 2 million units, while Crash Purple only sold 0.64. Now, it also does make me wonder if franchise fatigue was also beginning to be a thing as well, with there just being way too many Crash games releasing in a short window of time. That's kind of really hard to know for sure or quantify in any sort of way, but again, the sales numbers do seem to line up with this a bit as well. So bearing all this information and date in mind, it is perhaps no surprise that not only was Crash Twinsanity considered a misstep, but an absolute failure, one that clearly had consequences on the franchise going forward. They just tried to rejuvenate the Crash series, and now they would need to do it again, but this time to much more drastic results.
You recognize me, don't you? I'm here for Crash of the Titans, tell you about my game. Gonna jump on the back of a motorcycle, do some big hat. What you do? Woo! Woo! Jack the power! Here we go. Woo! I think I broke my back! Hey, somebody help the bandicoot! Come on, I'm laying here!
To start, the Little Traveler's Tales Oxford division, the little passionate team that tried to make Crash Twinsanity, done, gone, erased. So with them now disbanded, who would be developing the next Crash game? Well, that would be none other than Radical Entertainment, a Canadian video game developer based in Vancouver. The studio was best known for developing the Simpsons hit and run game, Scarface The World Is Yours, Prototype, and Prototype 2. But as far as Crash is concerned, they actually developed the next game, Crash Tag Team Racing, which again, we will go over and talk about all the spin-offs together in a later video. But I suppose on that note, it's worth mentioning there was other spin-off titles released after Twinsanity, besides Tag Team Racing, one being called Crash Boom Bang on the DS, and it is considered one of the worst entries in the series by pretty much everyone in the fandom. It is also the worst selling game in the series too, at only 0.09 units. The Crash series really was a sinking ship at this point. The mistakes were getting larger, and as noted, something drastic needed to be done, at least from the perspective of the publishers, and realistically probably the developers, for the sake of trying to get the series out of the shadow of its original trilogy. And so, Radical's goal was to get pretty radical with the changes, you might say. As noted in the exclusive first look at the game that would come to be called Crash of the Titans, the article written by Craig Harris would write, quote, "Developed by Radical Entertainment, this action-focused adventure not only gives Crash a whole new look, but changes the core mechanic of the gameplay style that most Crash Bandicoot fans are familiar with. Sierra recently let us look at an early version of Crash of the Titans in action on the Wii, so we could see some of the ideas and motion on the Nintendo console. The big change in the Crash Bandicoot design is the shift in game mechanics. Where Crash used to be a platform hero in Crash of the Titans, he's now taking a more physical role in his punch and kick focused brawler style of design. In Radical's take, Crash must work his way through the 3D environments, beating up on evil critters using the Wii remote and nunchuck combination. Punches and kicks will take down the smaller enemies, but the key design elements in Crash is the ability to jack enemies and use their specific attributes to take down the bigger creatures. As the developer puts in, there's a food chain device where Crash won't be able to take down the gigantic creatures. Instead, he can take down the smaller ones, jack them when they're stunned, then use that creature to knock out even bigger creatures so Crash can jack them, and so on." Unquote. So basically, while past Crash games had a focus on platforming gameplay, this game would have a primary focus on action, a beat 'em up. Now, IGN would go on to interview most of the significant members of the Radical Entertainment team during this time before the game's release, asking questions about the new design philosophies and why they chose to take the series in this, to put it bluntly, very different direction. With Sam Shee of IGN Australia interviewing Chris Mitchell, who is the writer and game developer, Joe McGinn, who's the lead game designer, Bob Churchill, Josh Mitchell, and Des Hinkston, all of which are also game designers, as well as Yosef Mapera, who was the art director of the game. Here are a few select noteworthy questions and answers from this interview. Quote, after more than a dozen games across several generations of consoles and handhelds, why do you think Crash is a lasting character and franchise? To which Chris Mitchell, writer and game designer, answered, quote, that's easy. The fact that Crash doesn't talk. Crash is a very emotive but non-verbal, so any player can just pour themselves into the character. That sort of heroic fantasy fulfillment is great for players, as they really feel like they are going through the game themselves. Crash's unique humor style is very cross-cultural as well, and really stands apart from the video game stereotypes of violence and heavy-handed stories. You've taken the series in a new direction, with more action-oriented gameplay, and the new enemy jacking mechanic. Tell us about how the team decided on these aspects as a focal point, and what they bring to the series. Joe McGinn, lead game designer, answers, quote, we are huge fans of the original Crash games, and if you go back and play those games, they are pretty challenging. They were made for gamers. They weren't kids' games. We wanted to recapture that feel, but gameplay has moved on in the last 10 years. We felt it was time to bring Crash out of the one-button combat era with moves that are deeper. We call the fighting style Street Fighter Light. It's not hardcore controls like Soul Calibur, but there's real depth in our combat system for skilled gamers to explore. The jacking mechanic is a great way to expose more moves than Crash could ever have on his own. Plus, jacking appears to a gamer's sense of fairness. Anything the AI can do, you can do too to them. Even the boss's moves had to be constructed knowing that the player could use them. How do each of the versions compare visually to one another? Note, this is in the context of this game releasing on multiple platforms. Yosef Mapera, art director, answers, quote, we took a very different route in making the art for this game. We had 3 pieces of extremely different technology, so we had to find a way to develop a strong look for them all, and at the same time be consistent between the platforms. We knew the answer was to base our look on strong artistic styling and the principles of traditional art, and not on the various technologies available. This approach was the backbone of our art team. From concept art to final pass, we treat each piece as a painting. Strong art will be strong art regardless of what media it is being pushed through. We don't use every crayon in the box, but we use the ones that give the best results. Lighting composition, color theory, graceful shapes, and areas of focus were our team's chosen crayons, unquote. On the note of art direction, something that was made extremely apparent in all the new promotional material and marketing, which there was a ton of for this game by the way, was the fact that all the Crash Bandicoot characters had gone through major redesigns. This was done with the intention of, well, for one, giving Crash a brand new look, sort of modernizing the characters a bit, perhaps also to visually represent how this game was different from the other games, something which seemed to be a real balancing act for Radical Entertainment, both trying to create something they figured old fans would enjoy and be respectful to the original source material, while also making radical changes that, I suppose the hope was, would grab people's attention on Crash Bandicoot again, and be a bold new direction for the franchise going forward. Again, not unlike Crash Twinsanity in that way, just much more drastic. This topic of art style choice and general philosophy behind these changes is expanded upon more in an interview with Kristen Forbes, the game's primary producer. Quote, when designing the character's new looks, were you going for a more modern approach? Or was it a decision made because Crash is moving to the next generation? We wanted a unified style with the cast of main characters. Crash and his team had gone through so many iterations over the years, our challenge was to realign them to look like they all exist in the same universe. After that, we made them more modern. For example, we added a flair of punk to Nina, along with the schoolgirl look. Same with Crash. We gave a punk edge to them. Now they look distinct from other cartoon characters. With the monsters, we went with a stylized look of big shoulders, big forearms, a mix of curves and angles. We found a way to bring some comic book cool to the cartoony designs. Does the game continue off of Twinsanity? Redefine that question. Would you consider it part of the main canonical storyline set forth by Naughty Dog and Traveler's Tales? Yes, the Twinsanity concept and character development is part of our storyline. We like each character's characterization, so we saw no need to change that. We are hugely immersed in the Crash universe and stay true to that. The characters were already funny, so we gave them the chance to display that. According to various sources, the game will be more action-based. Would you say that the game is about a 50-50 split of battling and platforming, or does one tip more to one side? Crash of the Titans nets out to be about 30% platforming and 70% combat. The game is nicely paced in that regard. The vertical exploration is challenging and fun, and takes you to the destination fights, which are exciting and deep. Most of Crash's marks on his arm. In some screens where Crash commands a Titan, these arm marks appear to glow bright blue. Is this related to the storyline? In the Mojo Temple, where the masks live, there are magical markings and patterns on the wall when Crash jacks an enemy, so they are under Aku Aku's magic. They get those tattoo markings to represent the magical powers of jacking, kind of like war paint. We wanted to unify Crash with the Titans using this symbolism, unquote. So, bearing all that in mind, this game was taking quite a bold step as far as designs go, making the characters have a more punk edge, as they put it. Crash even going so far as to have tribal tattoos that both represent this artistic choice, but also is representative of the new abilities and lore within the game. A game where there is now going to be a 70-30 split between combat and platforming, meaning this game was going to be a hell of a lot more like a God of War type game than it was any sort of Crash or hell 3D platformer game in general at this point. So, with all that being said, how did the game turn out? Did these creative choices bear fruit? Did this game ultimately give the Crash franchise the much needed boost it needed to keep the series alive, as well as be bold and maybe even a better direction for the series going forward? And significantly, what are my thoughts, my honest opinions about Crash of the Titans? Well, I don't like it. And now, the story of Crash of the Titans, as described by Dr. Neo Cortex.
Well, the story of Crash of the Titans is, look, I'm gonna keep this brief, okay? Basically, Crash, Coco, and Crunch are all hanging out on the beach, doing whatever they do, when I arrive on my airship and kidnap Coco and Aku Aku, freeze Crunch, and leave Crash behind because, I don't know. Well, anyway, Crash saves Aku Aku, and then me and Uka Uka. Oh my god, what happened to him? Oh my goodness. Anyway, we are stealing this magical energy called Mojo, which gives us the ability to create a loyal army of mutants, and also to create my newest, greatest Adventurenator, the Doominator. That sounds like something from Phineas and Ferb. However, after a brief scuffle with Crash, Uka Uka decides that I am no longer fit to lead my own army, and that I have apparently failed too many times to be reliable. I could say the same about him, honestly, but regardless, so he fires me and enlists the help of my stupid, bitch, backstabbing, hot topic, monkey gutter whore of a niece, Nina. So, now that she's in charge, and Crash is going to come and try to stop us, and listen, you get the point. I've been demoted from main villain to side gag. Oh, guess the upside is that I can't be blamed for when this stupid plan inevitably fails. Again, because of a retarded orange dog in pants jumping on shit. Oh, guess I'll just watch from the sidelines this time with a nice Big Mac with a soda and those little fries I love. Oh, splendid.
So yeah, the plot of this game, in a similar fashion to Crash Twinsanity, is much more comical and, generally speaking, very cartoony. All things considered, the plot of this game is actually not bad. I would say, generally speaking, it's not quite as funny as Crash Twinsanity though, but it does have that little bit of edge that keeps things very interesting. A fascinating bit of lore added to this game and its sequel, Mind Over Mutant, is the addition of the Mojo magic, the source Cortex is trying to steal to empower his new mutants. This is something that was never brought up in any of the other games, and is what makes this game at times feel like a pseudo reboot for the series. It's clearly not a reboot, mind you, let that be made very clear since it shares continuity with the other games, but a lot of new concepts are either introduced or things are entirely retconned. Some small, like the islands they live on being called the Wumpa Islands now instead of the Insanity Islands, to some bigger things like Coco's personality being pretty, different here, with her being more, how do I put this?
Help me get this gizmo working! At long last, the world will have a way to recycle butter! Hey, that was a good one! That's right, Crash! Rip her butt, and then we'll get pancakes with cherry topping!
Dumb, lol random, I guess? Rather than being the smart one of the group. I mean, I guess she is still into technology and stuff, she just feels off. Quite a few characters went through pretty drastic character changes though here, both personality-wise and design-wise, which I suppose is the biggest thing to address before we move forward. I don't dislike all the character design changes. Some even look pretty good, I'd say. Cortex looks pretty damn good here, and as does Nina, both of which just sort of leaning into that more gothic punk aesthetic that kind of was introduced a bit in Twinsanity. Engine also looks pretty good here too, even if for the most part they just kind of dulled his color palette. But there's quite a few I'd say missed the mark design wise. Tiny is, well, he's just a different character.
Crash, I really am cross with you. I'm just trying to do my job, and you go and cause all this chaos. I'm sorry, but I'm gonna have to eat your face.
I don't even dislike this design, but besides the name, this character is completely different from Tiny in the other games, that was well established as a villain in Crash's enemy list. And more than that, he has a completely different personality as well. Aku Aku looks okay, again, pretty different character design wise, but it's alright. Uka Uka, boy, did they ever get a huge change. He doesn't even have a lower jaw anymore. Again, I don't actually dislike this design as a design, but it, along with so many other things, feels like it was changed out of a need to just change everything. Needlessly, I would argue. Then we have the main trio, Crash, Crunch, and Coco, all of which look pretty different. Crunch looks fine, Coco looks alright, but Crash, man, there is just something off about Crash. Remember how I said in Twinsanity Crash felt kind of Steve-oified? Well, now he kind of feels, how do I put this? Crash kind of looks like he's a DeviantArt depiction of himself. I think it's the arm tattoos, in addition to the face that looks similar enough to him, but is also just different enough to feel off visually. I don't hate everything about this design, it just kind of feels like they're missing the point. That it's been made different just for the sake of being different. The tribal tattoos also definitely were done in an attempt to appeal to a larger audience. Again, to make him seem cool and hip and fresh, you know? That sort of stuff. I think the problem is that when a character does this, when it goes through a design change that makes them more edgy or punk or whatever, regardless if the design is actually pretty good or not, it always just comes off as desperate. It says that the old design isn't so timeless and needs updating to appeal to the mass market again. But then, how far can you go in that direction before you lose course of what the character even is? If you need to change the character to appeal to people again, I guess the question I pose is, why make any new games with him then? Why not just make a new character and series at that point? Start with something fresh, but perhaps inspired by the thing, you know? But the answer to that question is, because it's more financially sound to make more games of the same series. Theoretically, anyway. But I think that's what makes people not like these sort of changes so much. Because it comes off as desperate, greedy, and ironically uncreative. But does that mean that that's always the case? No, of course not. Plenty of series have gone through interesting changes and have been all the more loved and great for it. But nonetheless, it's hard to ignore that feeling with this game, especially when it comes to the gameplay. But we'll get to that in a moment. On the positive, though, the animation for these new models, I will say, is actually very, very good, with some great squash and stretch, and just in general, they are very emotive. Something else interesting is that it's kind of funny there was so much marketing material for this game. They spent a fortune trying to promote it, and these new designs and stuff, really trying to recover after Twinsanity. So much so that I think that this game has more promotional material than nearly any other Crash game. They even made a behind-the-scenes making of the game little mockumentary thing, where it's implied that Crash Bandicoot is not only really annoying to work with, but that he may be sexually harassing his coworkers?
Whoa. Let me see your IDs there, please. Okay, go ahead. Thank you.
Think that together. I think our results will be exactly what we're looking for, because I think it's similar in the way that you put that together.
Well, you know, Crash is, he's a great guy to have around. I like his street smarts. You know, he's a guy who, he sees a problem, he moves right in, he starts solving the problem. You know, doesn't spend a lot of time strategizing around it. He's an action-oriented guy.
No, please don't do that. Oh no, please.
We wanted to make a new game. We stepped back, we thought, how do we give him a whole bunch of power? And the obvious answer is, you know, throw a weapon in your hand. And then we thought, oh, but if you merge, like if we created a bunch of really ferocious enemies in the game, and you were able to take over and control them, these enemies essentially become your weapons. We've got 15 of them in the game, and once you beat them up a bit, then you get the opportunity to take them over and control them. Because when you're on top of them, when you're controlling them, you hijack them essentially in the game, so we call it jacking for short. That's where your power comes from, right? You're like riding these enormous creatures, and you have access to all their entire arsenal of abilities. So that's what we wanted. That was the hook of the game, and that's what we really wanted to focus on.
Use their power to destroy other enemies.
Crash, jacking only works in a game.
Crash, you're a charming guy, and it's not hard to keep you fresh. In this game, we remodeled you. I mean, you can see you've got a new bone structure, you've got a whole bunch of new abilities, right? And that required a new rig and a new model, so you're kind of heftier in this game. So that definitely keeps you fresh. And then the tattoos, of course, very hot. The tattoos are very popular. In terms of, you know, sort of etiquette, you know, politics around the office, bodily functions leap to mind. You know, he's not really discreet.
I also like how in the opening of the game it's presented in this shadow ham puppet style. Though that lore it seems to show about how Crash came to be is again completely wrong, and is another one of those strange retcons in this game that makes it feel separate or in a slightly different continuity, or again like a soft reboot for the franchise. But again, it's not, it's just contradictory and dumb. I'll try not to get held up on the narrative continuity of fucking Crash games too much, but I still feel like it's worth noting the strange inconsistencies where I see them. And again, I just have to ask the question, why? Beyond that though, the actual narrative of the story itself The plot twist of Nina taking over as the main villain I thought was kind of cool. And like I said before, I thought Nina was such a fun and cool little addition to Crash Twinsanity. So it's interesting getting to see her again here play a much bigger role. Also, the cutscene where it happens is well done, showing Engine's penchant for pain and suffering for himself from his master.
Thank you, Master!
The whole game is like that though, with some pretty wild adult jokes later on, again in the vein of Twinsanity, and I'll go over some of those in more detail in the plot as we go forward. But you've probably noticed that thus far I've been mostly positive to mixed on the plot and main design concepts for Crash of the Titans. So why did I slam a hammer into the game earlier? Well, so, in case it wasn't made abundantly clear by now, Crash of the Titans is a beat-em-up game, or perhaps you could call it a character action game, but we're kind of splitting hairs. Like so many other 3D platformer series at this point in time, notably the ones that were not as confident in their series at this particular point in time, there's a serious shift from platforming to combat, though platforming is still very much a part of the game as well. Crash has a basic 3-hit combo, a heavy attack / block break move, a double jump, this slow descent jump that I guess is kind of similar to a super spin. You can also use Aku Aku as a shield to block attacks, as well as kind of a dodge roll, though it's more of a dodge backwards and move quickly out of the general wave of enemies that you're in, rather than any sort of true dodge roll or anything. This ain't Crash Dark Souls, if that's what you're thinking. Oh, and you can also spin, kind of. See, in this game, when you defeat enemies or break objects, you get this new collectible item called Mojo, which has pretty much replaced Wampa Fruit in this game as the main collectible. Though Wampa Fruit are still in the game, but instead they're a fair bit more rare and refill your health bar instead of be the main collectible. Collecting these Mojo balls slowly fills up your XP bar, and when it fills up all the way, you unlock either a new move or a combo for Crash to use against his enemies, or an upgrade to one of these 3 things: his health bar, his spin power, and his slide power, all of which we'll get into a second. Besides this, the other main mechanic of the game is the new jacking ability, where these big mutants that Cortex has created, all of them being combinations of animals, sort of like Dingodile as an example, and you basically fight them, filling out their star meter until you knock them out, after which you can then jack them and use them to fight other mutants, destroy smaller enemies in one hit, or use their abilities to break past the barrier to make further progress in the level. Between all the combat encounters, there are little moments of platforming here and there, though nothing too complex. Certainly not anywhere near as difficult or as interesting mechanically as past games, since there's no longer a focus on platforming. And there's also occasionally these segments where you have to slide on Aku Aku as a skateboard through these slides. And that's pretty much it. That's the core gameplay of Crash of the Titans. Beat shit up, beat bigger shit up so that you can more easily beat the smaller or bigger shit up, and then occasionally do some light platforming. Now, on the surface, this all seems okay. Certainly not very true to Crash's gameplay in any of the other games, a rather big departure in fact, but perhaps if judged on its own merits, it could still be a good game, right? No, this game is fucking dog shit. But let me break down why, rather than just simply say that outright. See, the thing I see most people say about this game is that it's an alright, maybe even pretty good game. It's just not a good Crash Bandicoot game. And while this is a fair take, I just personally, fundamentally disagree. I believe that Crash of the Titans is both a bad Crash game and a mediocre game overall. But the thing is, while I will talk about why I feel as its own thing it just isn't very good, I also kind of find this line of thinking to be a bit flawed anyway. Because the thing is, it is a Crash game. It is the next entry in the Crash franchise. And as a Crash game, it's a failure, especially when one considers that so much was lost in the pursuit of this new gameplay style. Everything from the story, the gameplay, the character designs, everything about this feels like they wanted to toss the baby out with the bathwater for the sake of being different as possible after Twinsanity failed to meet sales expectations. And I guess I can't blame them for this sudden shift. It honestly makes sense on some basic level after the last game sold so badly. But something is clearly lost when you do that, and what was lost is anything that made people like these games to begin with. As a Crash game, this gameplay is honestly antithetical to the design philosophy that went into the series' best entries. All platforming sections are easy, not even worth noting. Hell, and because of that health bar now, you don't even have to worry about avoiding obstacles in sections since, I mean, you can pretty much just brute force through them now since it'll just take a little bit of health off of you. Like, who cares? Not to mention that the super spin is now much slower, but also broken in that pretty much every platforming encounter, you can kind of just rely on it and you never have to worry about any platforming sections in this supposed platformer game. But then I guess it's not a platforming game anymore, it's a beat 'em up, meaning you now can expect to walk to an area, be forced to fight hordes of enemies until you either get a Titan to break through the area, or the game just gives you a power-up to one-shot a big Titan, or the game just kind of lets you progress after you've killed multiple hordes. This makes every level pretty slow to get through, meaning that lovely level design they have by Warped, where you can both get through a level normally but also use all your power-ups to blaze through that shit, it's gone. Collecting stuff has also gone away here too, because while yes, there are collectibles, they're either literally right on your path and easy enough to get, or they come in the form of these little beat-em-up challenges. Gone are secret paths, death paths, and frankly any sense of replay value at all. So, in other words, collecting stuff through secret paths, platforming challenges, and time trials and general replay value. All this is gone. And for what? All of this was sacrificed for the sake of beat 'em up gameplay. So okay, fine, cool. Clearly this game is built to be at least 90% with this gameplay in mind. I mean, I guess I could be generous and say 70%, but really, this is the most important element of the gameplay. So with that in mind, is the beat 'em up gameplay good then? Since clearly so much time and focus was put into it. No, not at all. At least not in my personal opinion. I'm not exaggerating when I say that Crash of the Titans combat goes between two extremes. Mindlessly dumb to tediously annoying. Basically, you go between fighting back grunts, which is a simple enough affair. They can all be beaten up by a 3-hit combo or two. Or you have the Titans, which if you're fighting just one of them one-on-one, it's easy and mindless. Either just spin attack them until you knock them out, or if they block, which they often do, just keep using the same heavy attack over and over again until you jack them, since they will very rarely ever do anything else once they start blocking. This, regardless of the type of Titan, what moves they have, or how far you are into the game, is mindless and repetitive, and makes what I think was supposed to be little mini-boss type encounters into a one-button affair. You defeat all the grunts by pressing the square button. You defeat all the Titans by pressing the triangle button. Rinse and repeat, time and time and time again, that's the game. Unless there is more than one Titan going after you, in which case suddenly the combat is really fucking annoying. Mostly because often when you try to use a heavy attack or blocking a Titan, the other will attack you, which knocks you back, and gives enough time for the other Titan that you were just blocking to hit you. And even if they don't, it's enough time for the star meter to go down, since it slowly goes down if you don't keep hitting them. It's not crazy difficult or anything, mind you. It's just annoying enough when you go against 2 or more Titans to feel tedious. Like a test of patience more than skill. I tried playing through the game at least 3 different times. Twice on normal difficulty and 1 on hard difficulty, which I will say there is definitely a significant increase in difficulty on hard mode, though it is mostly that the Titans will just simply be more aggressive. However, when you're fighting a Titan one-on-one, it's pretty much the same across all the difficulties. They will do the same thing over and over again. But when you're fighting multiple titans, it's also the same across all difficulties. It'll just be more difficult on the hard mode because now the titans are even more aggressive and now you gotta play even more safely or find a way to cheese an encounter so that only one of the titans will attack you versus all of them. In fact, that seems to be the strategy overall, is just hope that one of the titans will kind of go after you and the others will sort of keep their distance. Since, while yes, you can fight multiple at the same time, the game doesn't really give you a lot of combat options for doing this. I mean, you do have a few heavy attack combos. Anytime I tried this, I found that I was often hit out of the combo, if there was multiple anyway. So I had to kind of like do this strange thing of setting it up so that I had enough time to hit them and there wasn't going to be multiple hitting me at once, which I guess is sort of a little bit of depth in the gameplay, but again, for a beat 'em up, it just doesn't feel good in my opinion. And that's especially true whenever you're not forced to fight multiple titans at once. The obvious option is always just to attack one of them and then jack their powers to easily kill all the rest of them after that. You're incentivized to do that to such a degree that there really is no point in learning all the extra moves that you get with Crash. Yes, you can, and I did attempt to learn them and use all of them as best I could, but the truth is the game is about jacking those fucking enemies. All these encounters feel really unrewarding, clunky, and just not very interesting as a beat-em-up gameplay style. Now, the thing is, there are small moments where the combat is alright. For example, there are times when you'll need to fight and take over a titan so that you can then have the power to take down a bigger titan. And so you can then take down an even bigger titan and wreak havoc on the area, which is a kind of cool implementation of the jacking mechanic. However, even this ends up getting overused as well. I'll get to it in more detail in a moment, but these exact jacking titans to get bigger titans gameplay loop ends up replacing any and all boss fights in the game. So, yeah. However, both the mind-numbingly boring gameplay moments and the slightly more difficult, tedious parts of the game suffer from the same core problem. Crash's moveset is bad. Like, really fucking bad. Beyond your basic 3-hit combo and heavy attack, which will pretty much carry you through most of the game, like I noted earlier, you also have the heavy attack combo, a 1-2 light punch heavy attack, which I guess you can use on the titans when they are blocking instead of a heavy attack, if you feel like spicing it up, I suppose. And then the two main other moves you have are the spin and the Aku Aku slide move. The spin is an alright ability, with a fatal flaw. If you spin too long, you'll get dizzy and be open to getting attacked by enemies, meaning that Crash Bandicoot's signature move now comes with a pretty big drawback. Mind you that you do get upgrades as you level up throughout the game to be able to spin for longer sets of time, but then the way you actually spin in this game is by pressing the attack button and spinning your actual analog stick in a circle. And while I can sort of see the thought process behind this, in practice, this feels like absolute shit to perform. I feel like sometimes the game will just not pick up my inputs for this move either. And furthermore, getting out of this move can be done by jumping before you go dizzy, but this launches you up in the air. And this feels super disjointed, especially if you're doing that to attack an enemy. I guess it gets you out of the action, but it just kind of makes for the whole thing feeling, again, very clunky. Like the way the move is performed almost makes it feel like I should be launching the enemy up in the air with me or something after I'm done spinning. It almost like kind of just makes sense. For a gameplay like this, it feels right in my head. But no, that's just not this game's style, I suppose. Then you have the Aku Aku slide move, which is fine, I guess. It's useful for the occasional long empty hallway that this game will put you in, and for slightly faster traversal in general. It can also knock over smaller enemies, but it's pretty useless against titans and overall it feels a lot more niche than any of the other moves, despite how many upgrades you get for it throughout the game. And besides that, that's pretty much it. You have a bunch of simple yet slightly clunky abilities, which is wild to me, because for a game where the core of it is fighting enemies and leveling up your character, you sure as hell don't get many new moves. Instead, you just kind of level up the abilities that you already have to make them last a little bit longer. And this is a big reason why, as a game, even outside of being Crash Bandicoot related, that it is just kind of boring. There is nothing dynamic about the combat, and while all the character animations do look great, and even some of the monster design and stuff can be pretty cool, it can't make up for what amounts to an overly basic and monotonous combat system. Now some of you might be wondering, okay, but does it need to have a complex battle system? If Crash had more moves at his disposal, would it be a better game, really? Crash games, after all, were pretty simple at their core, so why would you expect much more out of it just because it's a beat-em-up game? To which I'd answer, yes, it would be a better game if you had more moves. Because beat-em-ups, or character action games, depending on how you want to classify this game, need to be more complex to stay interesting. Why? Because the same is true for every other genre of game. Crash games, while simple, get more complex as the game goes on, through either more difficult platforming challenges, more tricky obstacles, or harder to find collectibles. Most JRPGs get more difficult through enemies or boss battles that require more strategy to beat, have longer health bars, or there'll be longer dungeons that you'll need to get through, with save points being more segmented and harder to find. A puzzle game of literally any kind would have more difficult puzzles the closer you get to finishing the game. My point here being is that a well-designed game will have some semblance of more complexity added to the game as you go along. This could be difficulty, this could be new abilities, this could be either a new mechanic or pushing mechanic of the game further. And for character action games, having new moves, learning to master a moveset of combos, being able to engage in enemies in multiple different ways is key to what makes these sorts of games fun, at least to me anyway. It's why games like Devil May Cry 3 or God Hand are so well beloved, because there is not only a complex moveset, but there's even actually multiple complex movesets that change the way that you engage with the game and its enemies. That makes it not only fun, but replayable, and it even gives you some level of customization with how you engage with the enemies. Not to mention that those games also just control better and feel better to move around and attack enemies in, which is important because that's the entire fucking game. And Crash of the Titans has none of that, which is a shame, because it could have done so much with Crash's moveset to make a really great game. I would shut my mouth about this game being a beat-em-up if they actually translated Crash's moveset from the past games into an interesting combat system. For example, how about you make Crash's signature spin move part of a 3 or 4 hit combo? Why not, instead of doing that stupid movement with your analog stick for a spin, why not just make a longer spin by holding down the square button? Honestly, that one just seems so fucking obvious, I can't believe they didn't do that. You could also integrate Crash's jump ability into his moveset, being able to jump on enemies' heads, bounce upward, which you could then use to either combo into a body slam or attack enemies down below, or a big spin attack which could push enemies away as sort of an AoE attack. You could integrate Crash's slide move, not the Aku Aku mask thing, but his actual slide move from Crash 2 and 3. You could make it part of a combo attack where you slide into an enemy and then you could either just start spinning into them and what have you and attacking them as normal, or instead of a slide jump, you know, the signature move of the Crash Bandicoot games, you could do a slide uppercut attack. This could also be used to break blocks in the game, and it would also send smaller enemies up in the air, which you could then spin into other enemies, adding to the combo. You could also make certain enemies require that you jump on them use the slide move, or knock other enemies into them to make them vulnerable. In particular, this would make a lot of the Titans more interesting if you had to engage with the other enemies to attack them, or if you just had to use more of your moveset in an interesting way or a combination to be able to get through to them, rather than just, you know, use a heavy attack over and over again. You could also integrate Crash's Wumpa Bazooka into his moveset. Maybe he could use it as a heavy attack, or he could use it as a long-range attack, or maybe he could use it as a combo to blast an enemy backwards. Or maybe as you level up, you could even do a Wumpa Bazooka spin, where now when you spin, there's like a bunch of Wumpas that are all being shot out all around at random as well. This would make extra sense the more powerful enemies come along and the bigger hordes that come in to try to attack you. There's so much that you could do with Crash's moveset that goes beyond even what I've just said too. Hell, even new moves like the Aku Aku skate ability could work with this as well. But the big point is that if you're gonna make a character action game out of Crash, why not utilize his moveset from the other games? Why not be more creative with Crash and what his franchise brought to the table, instead of just your basic 3-hit combo and heavy attack? Hell, he could even get new abilities after you defeat a boss. You know, just like Crash Warped and the Wrath of Cortex. But instead of new platforming abilities, he would get new combat abilities to reflect the new gameplay. All of this I don't believe is too far of a stretch to ask for. It is, after all, the core gameplay of this game. And again, if it's gonna be a character action game or beat 'em up, then it's only fair to compare it to the stuff that was out at the same time and expect some similar level of quality, or at least an attempt at depth. But see, I think there's a reason that this game doesn't have a very complex or interesting combat system. And that is because, at its core, this game is actually very gimmicky to begin with. Because the core mechanic of it is less to do with the actual combat, but was what was advertised all over the place for this game. The ability to jack on the Titans and control them. And that's a tremendous problem. It's a problem because I'm fairly confident that the reason we don't have a more interesting or complex moveset for Crash in this game is because it's mostly a means to an end in this game. The end being to jump on a Titan and use their overpowered abilities to mindlessly kill everything. And while this concept isn't all that bad, it's clear that they put too many of their eggs into this idea basket, and literally every other part of the game suffers for it, including the actual combat and Crash's moveset by himself. Okay, so then is the combat fun while you play as a Titan? Not really. I mean, there's a few. There's like your basic big lumbering ones that have like a claw and AoE attack. Then there's the ones that can shoot projectiles, and there's these kind of cool ones that you can jump on and use the spin around in a big ball and stuff. I do find these ones at least pretty fun. And you have various flavors of big-ass monster that one-shots everything in its path. And while yeah, that can be fun sometimes to do as well, and play as, they don't do anything else with this after a while. I said before that I like the ones where you roll on them like a ball, and part of the reason why is because there are then parts of the level that show up where you have to actually use it to platform through this area, where you gotta bounce on it and avoid giant buzzsaws. I just found that to be kind of cool because some of the level actually made use of the creature's abilities in a way that Crash couldn't. But the others are mostly just there to break a wall or kill the rest of the horde of enemies, usually in an enclosed space or narrow hallway. I guess the shooting ones get sections too, but those are legit just shooting at things from a distance before they ever get a chance to ever attack you, waiting for a platform to move or something like this. Riveting. It really does feel like the developers of this game wanted you to be in awe over controlling these giant monsters and kind of let that coast you through the whole game. And while again, they can be fun from time to time, but ultimately, it's just kind of a shallow experience that feels like it's half-baked at that. Have you ever eaten a shallow, half-baked cake?
Tastes like shit!
So no. As a Crash game, this gameplay has near nothing in common with any of the strengths of the franchise. And take taken as its own thing, pretending that it's magically not a Crash game, is still an empty and monotonous game, in my personal opinion. If you happen to like it, good on ya though. But having played through this game 3 times at this point for this video, I feel like any fun that could have been gleaned from it is long gone by the time I'm about a third of the way through the game each time I played it. I said I'd mention it earlier, but sadly the bosses of this game, this action combat game, are basically non-existent. There are 5 bosses in the game, one where Cortex stands on top of a pillar and watches you, I guess, while you do a whole jack a titan to jack a bigger titan so you can jack the boss titan that just otherwise stands there and does nothing. Then you just use the boss titan to break the walls of the temple, and that's it. Boss over. Well, about Tiny Tiger? Well, in his boss fight, you jump on a big titan and walk across a crumbling bridge, breaking a couple of walls till you get to him and just sit there and watch a cutscene. You don't actually get to fight him at all. Okay. The next boss is Engine, I guess, and you just jack a titan and break 3 easy little targets in the room, and that's it. Completely done. You don't even, like, fight a bigger titan or anything. The dude that always has the best boss fights in the game, Engine, gets literally nothing in this game. Then the next boss is Uka Uka, and while kind of cool conceptually and a bit more difficult due to the type of titans in the room, and the fact that Uka Uka actually fucking does something to try and kill you in the fight, makes it at least kind of feel like a boss fight. However, it is also just the first boss fight again mechanically, where you jack a titan to then jack onto Uka Uka's body that he got through the power of the Evolvo Ray that is randomly here for some reason, by the way, and you break these 3 power generators for the Evolvo Ray, I guess, and that's it. And then the final boss is literally the same boss as the Uka Uka and Cortex one, just jack a titan to jack another titan to jack the boss and destroy 3 things in the room. And it's actually far easier than the Uka Uka boss fight at that. It's all rather pathetic, especially since, you know, this is a fucking action game? Wouldn't you expect the one thing that would be kind of interesting in this game is that the boss fights would be way more involved than any of the normal Crash games this time around? Wouldn't you expect there to be like a Titan on Titan boss battle or some shit? Well, if you did, then you thought wrong. In fact, they are hardly boss fights at all, and you never really actually get to fight any of the main villains, besides Uka Uka and Nina directly, which I think is pretty fucking lame. With all that being said, I suppose I have gone on about the gameplay enough, so let's quickly comb through the rest of the story of this game, look at any other elements such as the art direction, music, and overall character-based stuff, and how it was handled. So the long and short of it is, after the intro of the game, Crash and Aku Aku make their way to this big mojo temple of sorts, where they go and try and stop Cortex from stealing any more of it, in what I'll call the first arc of the game, since in this game every level is denoted by an episode title, usually with 4 levels that lead to a boss-like encounter, and then the story progresses and we make our way to a new location for another set of 4 levels. Anyway, this first area is meant to be the Wumpa Islands jungle, stuff that should in theory be kind of similar to past Crash games, and I suppose it is. Another little feature of this game is that all the enemies will talk and have pretty charming little conversations if you stand away from them and kind of observe them for a while. You don't have to do this, but it does add a lot of charm. While the gameplay may be ass, the presentation is quite nice overall. It's clear a lot of effort was put into the dialogue to capture that strange off-kilter vibe Twinsanity had going for it, including some more adult jokes. That being said, these guys are here to get the mojo, and so our journey takes us to the Temple of Zoom, where we gotta stop them. Where did this mojo magic stuff come from, and why does collecting its mojo balls have a stock sound effect used in other games? I don't really know, but I guess it's just another thing Cortex and Uka Uka are trying to obtain, like the crystals and gems, so whatever. However, as noted before, after this little boss fight, and Cortex revealing to Crash and Aku Aku that he's building a robot called the Doominator that will help him conquer the world, we then get the twist of Cortex being sidelined to Nina now being the main villain of this game, which again I found overall to be a pretty interesting twist. Then Crash and and Aku Aku end up going through this desert area with redneck koalas, and by the end of this arc of levels, you'll find yourself in a volcano with these very cool robots drilling for more mojo. Again, artistically speaking, this all looks rather nice. A cool feature of both Crash of the Titans and Crash Mind Over Mutant is that if you look at the concept art for these levels, often there's areas in these levels that are a direct translation of the concept art in a way that is kind of wild how they did it. So in that regard, I can commend them on some pretty cool looking areas and just overall a very stylish game from front to back. Environmentally speaking anyway. And then of course by the end you face off against Tiny, or rather you talk to him and fight some enemies in the area. I will say that if this were his own character, I actually do kind of like this version of Tiny. He is sort of funny and charming. I'd love to see more of him, but he's also just not Tiny, you know? I feel like the real Tiny would have gladly been altered to be even bigger, so as to better serve as a proper boss you gotta face off, and maybe even jack onto. Actually, come to think of it, you know what would have been really cool? If there was like a big boss tag team thing. Maybe Tiny Tiger and Dingodile could team up, and so you gotta face them both in a boss fight. And the only way to do damage to them is to jack onto one to harm the other. Maybe they could take turns fighting you, and while one sits atop a perch and shoots at you with like the flamethrower or tosses spears or what have you, you have to fight the other one down below until you're able to jack them and use their ability to knock the other one down from their perch. And then rinse and repeat that a few times until the final hit point, in which both of them team up into like a new abomination like Tiny Dial or some shit. So then you gotta beat them one more time to separate them again and take away the mojo that they stole to become more powerful like that to begin with. That could have been a super cool way to integrate the jacking mechanic into an actual boss fight that also calls back to these classic characters in Crash's rogue gallery of villains, and would have been a unique twist on it at that. But you know, whatever. Next we make it to this beach/factory setting run by Engine, with these little crazy monkey characters. You know, I guess I haven't really commented on it this whole time, but the music in this game is okay. Though nothing really stood out to me if I'm being totally honest. While playing the game, it all just kind of fell into the background. But when listened to it by itself, and I tried to vibe with it, it was again okay. It was decent music for writing the script with, and it certainly isn't all that bad. Hell, at times it kind of reminds me of Ratchet & Clank's soundtrack, but just not quite as good as any Ratchet & Clank track in my opinion. I get this is going to be more subjective, so if you really love the OST for this game, I can understand. It just doesn't really speak to my soul, if you know what I mean. I'm not listening to this stuff while a sick animated music video goes on in my head. You feel me? Anyway, by the end of this arc of the game, you face off against Engine, which I won't dream up a whole ass boss scenario again, but could you at least give the man a robot? A mech of any kind? I'm sure you can imagine all the cool stuff that you could have done with that. Maybe jacking individual pieces of the mech to work against him, or something of that sort. But we do get this rather interesting cutscene where we find out that Cortex kicks Engine in the ass in his nuts, but luckily he just so happens to enjoy that.
Of course not. Disgusting, filthy bandicoots! I hate them with cheese! They made it here! Now they'll help us save Dr. Cortex! Don't be ridiculous! You stupid! Hominid! We're with Nina now! We're with the winner! But Dr. Cortex is our friend! You don't have any friends! He always kicked you in the tuchus and other very gentle spots! But I liked it when he did that!
Before Crash has enough and just pulls on Engine's rocket on his head.
Guys!
Which I'll admit, caught me off guard and it's pretty funny. Oh, and also he's gay.
Your revolting sister is there too. Ugh, girls.
After this, we make our way to this lab held inside a giant tree, and by this arc's end, we face off against Uka Uka for the second time in the series' history. And it's again a really lame boss fight. Made even worse to this evil mask, the big bad of the series, where his boss fight just gets a temporary body that doesn't really do much of anything. Ideally to me, it would make more sense that this plot about magic mojo and being able to possess the bodies of other creatures, that Uka Uka would be planning all this to gain the ultimate body so he can destroy the world himself, tired of having to rely on his minions of evil. So they steal the mojo in pursuit of this. Uka Uka fires Cortex when he realizes that Cortex won't even be able to accomplish even this task for him, and instead enlists Nina. And by the end of the game, Uka Uka would have his ultimate body that they created. Only problem, now everyone, including Nina and Cortex, are gonna die to Uka Uka's power. There could have been even a funny moment about how Aku Aku warned them about this, and how Cortex knows how he never really took him that seriously. He's just a fucking mask after all. So then maybe Crash and Cortex and Nina have to team up in the end of the game through Crash's jacking powers to defeat Uka Uka. And instead of fighting him here in this random spot, you would fight Nina here instead, first. But this doesn't happen. Instead we have Uka Uka fighting us here, loses, and then we go off to finish the story by stopping Nina from completing the Doominator robot. Which, while kind of cool looking, we never actually get to fight or see in action or it do literally anything in the game. On the positive side though, I do like the aesthetic of these last few levels, particularly the lavish living quarters of Cortex and his crew. It's just a fun detail. I also do like the interactions between Cortex and Nina.
Terrible, ungrateful child! You'll never get away with this!
Oh, really? And why is that?
I'll tell you why. This is my fortress, and that is my robot out there, and I threw up in my mouth.
Sorry, Uncle. But with Coco forced to help build the robot, Crash and Aku Aku can't possibly stop me in time. My Doominator is almost ready, and when it destroys Wumpa Island, I won't even let you watch.
No, but I love watching things get destroyed. Oh, you're awful.
Thanks.
So anyway, by game's end, you make it to the control room and Nina says,
Crash! Get out of my robot! This is my body and my right to choose!
Yeah, bet you weren't expecting an abortion joke in a Crash game, but there you go. And once again, you have to fight Nina the same way that you have every other encounter in this game. You jack off a couple fucking titans until you can jack off the main boss titan to destroy some shit. The game ultimately ending with Crash, Coco, and Crunch eating pancakes because at the very end of the game, all of a sudden now they are obsessed with pancakes.
Whip for button, then we'll get pancakes with cherry topping! That's a relief. All our stuff was in there. Oh, Wumpa Island. But our stuff's okay. Now let's go home and eat pancakes. Pancakes!
Okay. Meanwhile, Cortex and Nina escape as well from the destruction of the robot, which at some point, I guess, left the sky and went onto the actual Wumpa Islands. This was never shown in any scene before this, mind you, so it kind of just feels like it was, like, supposed to be a cutscene that's just missing here or something. And then Nina is apologetic about betraying Cortex, and he says the following.
Your evil plan, and then failed.
Oh, Nina! Betraying me is the most vile, evil thing you could have ever done! You were a skank! I'm just so proud of you right now!
Hooray!
I promise, from now on, I'll be more evil, more villainous, more horrible! Horrible! Oh, and go kill bandicoots, too. I'm still going to spank you stupid for this.
Oh.
Ending the game overall. Now, maybe it seemed like I rushed through this summary a fair bit, but in the end, the plot of this game is kind of nothing. I mean, I do like the villains and their dialogue often. They're without a doubt the highlight of the game as far as story goes. But besides the twist that Nina is now the main villain of this game, not much else is really done with the story. Mind you, I wasn't expecting anything crazy, so I'm not necessarily shitting on the game for that. It's just kind of not really worth noting all that much. Something I haven't really noted up until this point though is in all the cutscenes, Crash, instead of emoting through animation and very select sounds, he now has this gibberish language that he does that I'm personally not that much of a fan of. I find that it kind of makes him a little bit annoying, and while not the most offensive thing in the world, it's just kind of not working for me. The game is over in about 5 hours or so, and overall by the game's end, I just end up feeling kind of empty. Until this retrospective, I gotta be real with you, I never played these games, Crash of the Titans or Mind Over Mutant, because they just never really looked all that interesting to me. I watched the cutscenes for them online, found all that to be pretty funny, and figured I got pretty much everything I could out of it. But I was willing to give it a shot, try to engage with it as best as I could, and give it an honest try to see if the gameplay is something that was actually fun, that there was more underneath the surface that I just wasn't seeing. But ultimately I came away with seeing this game for what it was, an extremely shallow experience, one that's supported by one single gimmick that honestly, if it weren't a Crash game, I don't think I would have ever really given this game the time of day at all. And while overall there are a few good ideas here and there, I think there are few and far between, and the flaws far outweigh any positives. It's a pretty looking game that is at least functional without glitches, and has a decent story. But what can I say, you can only jack off monsters the same way over and over again before things just start getting rather boring. I may have criticized Crash Twinsanity for a lot of things, but the one thing I will say is it was never a boring experience. A glitchy experience, a flawed experience, an unfinished experience, yes, but never boring. Like I said before, Radical Entertainment tried their best to make this game as different as possible, and they marketed the hell out of this game. But something very important was lost along the way in the pursuit of being different. However, this would not be the only mainline Crash game Radical Entertainment would end up developing. Unlike Traveler's Tales Oxford division, they would get another chance after this game, and that mainly had to do with just how well this game sold in comparison to Twinsanity. So what of their other outing? Was their sequel, Crash Mind Over Mutant, a better game or a worse game? Well, I suppose there's only one way to find out. And that is it, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so very much for watching through the whole video. I know that this one took a while to get to in my Crash retrospective. In fact, I'm pretty sure the Twinsanity video was like made a year ago or something. And some of you have been very persistent about asking me about when the next part's gonna be out. Well, it's finally here, and some more good news is that Mind Over Mutant script is already more than halfway done, and it will be coming out more than likely next month, so you'll be getting 2 Crash videos in less than a month. So, quit ya bitchin'. I'll be interested to see what people have to say about this video, mostly because though Crash of the Titans was definitely one of those games that was once very hated, I've noticed that over the years it's definitely gotten a lot more of a warm welcoming with people, a lot of people seeing the positives in it, and there are indeed some good positives. I just personally feel like because it got so much hatred back in the day, that there was this counteract where everyone felt like they need to be positive because it clearly wasn't as bad as what everyone was saying at the time. But clearly, whenever I've looked at it and gave it a good honest shot, I personally didn't like it all that much. But with all that being said, if you happen to like this video and want to see more stuff like it, be sure to like and subscribe. And I also want to take this time to give a super special thank you to all of my loyal patrons and channel members for helping to support me and all of my creative projects, including all of my night eggs and my night owlets, as well as a super duper special thank you to all of my great night owls, including Bandan, Sketch Lombo, Leo, Somber Devante 06, Jeffrey Robery, Hexmaniac Kenna, and Ho Hot, as well as a super duper duper special thank you to all of my arch owls, including the wise Nicodemus, the talented Cherry and GT, the always chi vibes Zen Garden Party, the daring Daniel Petrie, the Super Saiyan Star Punch Gaming, the mysterious Mr. Gaming Sheep, the fearless Forgotten Ace, and the Supersonic Sword. Thank you all so very much for watching and supporting the channel. And until next time, this has been Dylan the Night Owl, flying off.